So world number one tennis player Novak Djokovic has been banned from entering Australia for 3 years. Take a look at this. This is from Tennis World, and they say exactly that. He's banned for 3 years. The backstory to this, we sort of touched on this in a previous segment, but I'll try to run through it again real quick for everybody. What happened was he was approved from Tennis Australia to come to Australia. Then when he got there, it was a sort of a big scandal, and you had, I believe it was the Prime Minister of Australia was like, no, we're not letting you in. And then, I don't know how long it took, maybe over the course of a day or two, or maybe 3, he was sort of like in detention to one extent or another. I don't know if he was at a hotel or whatever, some holding facility. And you had a judge overturn what the Prime Minister said and was like, no, we're actually going to allow him to come in here. This is all over the COVID vaccine. He was never vaccinated. Now, I'm going to get to more on that in a second, but first let me just give you legally what ended up happening. So then after the judge overturned what the Prime Minister said, then you had the top immigration official in Australia said, and this was maybe 4 or 5 days after that, the top immigration official says, okay, no, we're revoking your ability to be here, and we're going to kick you out. And I believe it was with that ruling, with the top immigration official who was like, and we're also banning you for 3 years. Okay. So why did all this happen? How did all this happen? Well, Novak Djokovic claimed, I think, a medical exemption to getting the vaccine. And Tennis Australia approved it, but apparently this doesn't jive with the laws of Australia. So the Prime Minister of Australia was like, no. So after Novak got there, that's when he said, like, no, you got to go. And then it went back, forth. Novak Djokovic didn't get vaccinated for COVID. Simply speaking, because Novak Djokovic is anti-vaccine. And he's got all these, I read this crazy article, he's got all these wild beliefs about medicine that are just ridiculous. Like there was a doctor he went to in Serbia where the doctor put bread in one of his hands and his hand went down a little bit. And so he said, you have a gluten sensitivity. And Djokovic was like, wow, I guess I do. He's got all these just backwards ideas about medicine that are factually incorrect. He's a genuine anti-vaxxer, like he's been brainwashed by all the propaganda and he thinks that the vaccine is bad for you or whatever. Now, so the medical exemption, I mean, it wasn't, I don't know what he claimed in the medical exemption, but it wasn't like a real medical exemption. A lot of people pointed out, well, hold on now, you're like one of the best athletes in the world. What medical condition do you have where you can't get a vaccine? Well, come to find out, he actually had COVID not too long ago. And so now there's a scandal around that too, because when he had COVID, he was out in a number of different places doing events, probably spreading COVID. That's incredibly selfish and narcissistic and just you showing no concern for the people around you. Like somebody might die as a result of you giving it to them or you give it to somebody who then gives it to their grandma or something, right? So that was incredibly selfish on his part. And also he did lie on his immigration form where he was like, oh, I haven't been anywhere in the past like 14 days or whatever it was. I've been home. But come to find out, we know because of pictures posted on, I think it was Instagram, that he was actually traveling. So now having said all that, it is true he just recently had COVID. May have been his second bout with COVID too, because he had, during the first wave of COVID, he had some event and people weren't masked up, and this was before the vaccine, and so we got a lot of crap for that because it was a super spreader event. So he had COVID recently though, and he beat it. And so now, we know he has natural immunity. So I guess effectively in the talks with the Australian government when he was here, he's like, listen, I have natural immunity, so I should be able to play. I'm not really a health risk. And the top immigration official, the Prime Minister and the top immigration official weren't buying it, and they banned him. And again, they banned him for 3 years. So listen, my take on this is very simple. From a personal perspective and an intellectual perspective, I don't have any respect for Novak Djokovic. He's wrong. The vaccine is safe and effective, and it gives you 90% protection from severe illness, hospitalization, and death. It's also not just about you. It's about everybody else and trying to protect other people. So he's wrong, and I have no problem saying he's wrong, and I have no problem saying he's an idiot based on the stuff I read about his medical views. But also, got to keep it real, this decision from the Australian government has nothing to do with public health at all. And anybody who says it does is just flat out lying. That's not true. Oh, it has to do with public health. That's why he was banned for 3 years? 3 years. 3 years. No. They're making an example out of him. They're making an example out of him. Comply, get the vaccine, or else. Now, my guess is people in Australia, and I haven't seen a poll on what people in Australia think, so I'm just guessing here, but they've dealt with much more severe COVID restrictions than people in the US and then a lot of people around the world. And in some ways, it's been successful. But that sort of hardcore, more authoritarian approach to this stuff, if you lived in that country, you'd probably feel like, hey, listen, I had to jump through all these hoops. I had to do all these difficult things. I had to, quarantine and stay inside and lock down and do all these things for so long. And then you're telling me this asshole tennis player gets to waltz in here after not getting vaccinated and he could just come in here and play, no problem. And so I think the fear was, and the view from the Australian public probably was, and obviously many officials in the Australian government, they thought, look, if we let him in, we're going to be viewed as like elitist, like making a special exemption for a guy because he's the number one tennis player in the world, and that's not fair. And so I think they wanted to avoid that perception, and so they cracked down on him, and they even over-cracked down on him by banning him for 3 years. The reason why I don't agree with that is very simple. I think natural immunity should be treated like vaccine immunity. And I do think that's the crux of the question here, because it doesn't matter what you personally think of Novak Djokovic and the way he acted, because I'll grant you every negative thing you want to say, selfish, narcissistic, so on and so forth. But I think there's no reason not to treat natural immunity like vaccine immunity. And so since that's the case, you'd almost have to be like, fine, okay, we're going to let you in, even though we don't agree with what you did here. I guess the technicality they can hold on to say, no, we're going to crack down on you, is because he lied on his form saying, oh, I haven't been anywhere, and he was somewhere recently. So if they want to try to get him on that technicality, I guess you have a somewhat reasonable argument to say you can't come in this year. I would disagree with it, but at least I see where you're coming from if you make that argument because he lied on the form. But when you say 3 years, no. And another point that people in the Australian government made was, look, he's going to fuel anti-vax sentiment more by doing this. I totally disagree. I think the exact opposite is true. I think now by banning him, especially for 3 years, you have now made him a martyr. So if you wanted to avoid firing up the anti-vax people, mission failed, because you just fire them up more now. And if anything, it's even worse because I'm somebody who's staunchly pro-vaccine, and now I'm looking at it like I sort of feel bad for the guy, even though he's a piece of shit. 3 years banned, and by the way, I haven't even brought up the tennis angle of this because it's secondary to the health and government angle of this, but he has 20 Grand Slam championships. He has 20 major championships in tennis. Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal also have 20 major championships. Right now, they're basically tied in the argument for who's the GOAT. The first one to get to 21 kind of wins that conversation in maybe an undisputed way, at least until the end of all of their respective careers, and we know who truly is the GOAT. You want to take one of the majors off of the possibility for him for 3 years? For 3 years. I think that's way too punitive. I do. Look, again, I'll repeat it. They have a reasonable argument, one I don't happen to agree with, but they had a reasonable argument to say, look, you lied on your form, and so therefore, we're not letting you play this year. Okay? I still wouldn't have anything to do with public health, because he has the natural immunity, but at least you have a argument that I could see your perspective if you say this year, no. But 3 years? Nah. That's super dickish and very authoritarian, and it has absolutely nothing to do with science and nothing to do with public health. I can very confidently say I don't like Novak Djokovic personally based on the things that I've read throughout this whole saga, but I could also very comfortably say he should be allowed, in my opinion, he should be allowed to play this year and the next 2 years. And I know this might be a controversial stance among my audience, because most of my audience, thankfully, is very pro-vaccine, but you got to be willing to separate the conversation about the vaccine and vaccine efficacy and how well it works and all that stuff from a conversation about the policy surrounding it and what truly is about health and what's not about health and so on and so forth. And it's more complex and nuanced than a lot of people want to give it credit for, but I think this is way too punitive, and I feel bad for the asshole, if I'm being honest. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.